So what we're going to discuss today with this presentation is what we've been doing in Indiana to leverage the Coordinated Needs Management Strategy database, the CNMS, that has been developed by FEMA and that we've done quite a lot of work to enhance and reattribute some of the information in CNMS. We also will introduce a tool that we've created to do some cost estimating that utilizes both the CNMS data that FEMA has and some of the data that we've been able to develop to leverage that data. So some of the things we'll talk about are the data sources that we have in Indiana to help leverage what we have in CNMS, and we'll talk about the challenges in working with that. We'll go into a little bit about how we've implemented CNMS in Indiana and some of the history of how CNMS is developed in our state. And then we'll do a demonstration of the cost estimator tool and go over what is in that tool and how that works and how that's helping us as a cooperating technical partner fully leverage our data sources and come up with a better way to implement the program in Indiana. So what is Coordinated Needs Management Strategy? If you're familiar with anything in the FEMA mapping program, whether you're a CTP or a contractor or whoever, you've probably run into CNMS or worked with it quite extensively, perhaps. FEMA uses the CNMS to identify and track lifetime mapping needs for various the life cycles of these mapping needs. As you may be aware, FEMA is required to assess their inventory every 5 years per their statutes and rules. So CNMS is helping them do that. And is geared towards both doing that and to just manage the flood risk studies as they're being developed. It does track flood hazard mapping needs, and that's a key thing for CTPs and other folks who are planning mapping projects to realize and to be able to use so that they can determine where they need to focus efforts. And that's a lot of what we use CNMS for. So the original version of CNMS for Indiana, originally CNMS developed around 2009 in that time frame. Indiana had a series of record floods in 2008. And coming out of those floods, one of our mandates was to create a layer that would indicate where all of the square mile cutoffs were for the state. Our State Flood Control Act is based on streams that drain greater than 1 square mile. So that's an important data set for us. And we were able to use stream stats from USGS. That was a new program at the time, and they had just gone through and developed the flow accumulation grids with stream stats. Those flow accumulation grids basically give you the drainage area of streams along an area. We were able to leverage that information with the NHD, the National Hydrography data set that existed at the time, and come up with a data set that showed us stream reaches that drain greater than a square mile. So when we were developing that, is the same time that CNMS came to be. And when FEMA came to us about CNMS, we decided to kind of leverage the two projects together and actually created CNMS based on the data that we had created for the other project. It really was done in conjunction. We did both at the same time. But there's one data set originally that was both CNMS and had all the CNMS fields and attributes at the time, and also served our needs. But that was done using the 1 to 24,000 scale NHD, and was a complete data set, had both the zone A's and the zone X's, all the data, all the streams are greater than 1 square mile, whether they are mapped on a FEMA map or not. That is a requirement on our side in terms of the Indiana Flood Control Act It pertains to any stream, mapped or not mapped, specifically states mapped or not mapped in the FEMA program. Some of the applications we have a number of them, but one of the applications we use this CNMS line work with is the Indiana Hydrology and Hydraulics Model Library. And that is a library that we have to both serve out FEMA regulatory models, DNR regulatory models, which can be different and many times are different, and also all of our Zone A models and any other models we may have laying around. There's any number of models that have been created that we upload and tag to the CNMS reaches in this application. So one of the issues that we have with CNMS is that since 2009, it's evolved and changed quite a bit. We'll go into some detail on that on the next few slides, but we didn't want to reconfigure this this application every time we had an update or a CNMS change. So we've pretty much used the original line work that we created for CNMS back in 2009, froze that in place, and are using that still for this application to this day. So we've created quite a bit of new data since 2009. One of the big efforts that we've been working on in Indiana is to create a brand new NHD line work set. And so since we had new LiDAR, new orthos photos, we came up with some projects to develop a new NHD. This NHD is to 1 to 2400 scale. So at least 1 to 2400. So it is it's much more dense and refined than the original 1 to 24,000 data that we were working with. We've also delineated the streams up to a 6-acre basin limit, and that's pretty small. And so that gives us an enormous density of line work throughout the state. You can see kind of the example in the screenshot. You see here how much extra line work the reddish lines are the new line work. The blue and the red lines, or the blue and the black lines, are the NHD over top. The previous NHD, the previous CNMS, overlaid on that. So you can see how many stream segments that we've added. So we've got this great data set, very dense, very much more precise, but we need to do a few things with that to make it work right. Other data that we've had here, we've been working on delineating out floodplains and floodway for 18,000 miles of stream. It's a project we wrapped up in 2018. We've also published all of this data as the Indiana Best Available Floodplain Layer. So it is out there. It includes 8,000 miles of stream that are not published at all. They're completely Zone X on FEMA's map. We pretty much have mapped everything that we show that drain greater than 1 square mile. There are small reaches here and there that we have not mapped yet, but a lot of it is. However, this project was not a FEMA project, and not largely a FEMA project. FEMA did kick in some money at the end, but so therefore we did not have a project to go ahead and update firms based on this data. Therefore, we're just starting that process of updating the firms. So this information is not reflected in CNMS. We did have worked with the folks who maintain CNMS to add reaches where we've done studies and such, but the actual notification of whether a study is valid or not is not reflected in CNMS with our data. So that's another issue that we kind of have conflicts with CNMS about. Here just shows a screenshot of the current firms in Indiana versus what's been mapped in the Best Available Floodplain Layer. So the blue areas are the original FEMA or NFHL data, and the green are the additional study streams in the Best Available Floodplain Layer. just an example from a county in Indiana. So you can see there's quite a bit of extra floodplain that's been created in this area. So with that, we've decided from using the new NHD line work to create our kind of our own version of the project we did in 2009 using the higher resolution NHD data set that we have now. So we went through and did archhydro runs for each of the basins in Indiana, and we derived square mile cutoff maps using the new NHD. And then we combined those into reach index stream reaches, or floodway reaches, we also call them, just so that we have a way to kind of create a new standard for our state to manage studies of all sorts, not flood insurance studies, but also other studies, the models and a lot of the other things that we do at the Division of Water. So we've just created this, and we're just starting to started shifting some of our data over to this new nomenclature, this new framework that we have set up to create or to manage water resources in Indiana. So as I've indicated, CNMS has also been evolving and changing since we created our data set back in 2009. About a year ago, I think, maybe even a little more than that, FEMA initiated a project nationwide to create unmapped study lines. And then, so they came through and did a nationwide scale study or analysis to derive these unmapped lines. However, what happened in Indiana is that since we had our original lines already set, those lines kind of disappeared or deleted out of the original data set, and then FEMA added them back in using their updated data set. So we've lost some of our original data on the CNMS side. And you can see from this diagram where we have differences between the S unmapped line and the black reaches, which are ours. So a lot of information is, I mean, the streams are still there. However, the line work is not at the scale that that we have our line work at. So what the issue is really, what we came up with is that we really need to use the table attributes out of CNMS more than the line work. The table has all of the background information and the attributes that we need to manage our study process for updating flood insurance studies. So we really are looking at using that table, but one of the issues with CNMS is that it is updated using profile baselines that come from flood insurance studies for a lot of times, or just really any stream center line that somebody has. So a lot of times our original line work has been replaced by other line work, which is quote unquote better, but it's also not hydrologically connected. So you can't do flow tracing or anything like that with it. There's a lot that you really can't do with CNMS because it's just line work representations out there rather than a fully integrated GIS data set. When our line work, our stream reaches line work is a fully integrated GIS data set with connectivity and everything inherent in it. So we like the table from CNMS. We like the line work that we've created. So how do we merge the two? So we initiated a project to create a crosswalk. So basically, what we've done is took the reach ID out of S studies line. We really don't care about S unmapped. We've got that covered. There's not much data inherent in that data in CNMS anyway, so there's not really any need to work with that. But we took the reach ID out of S studies line in CNMS, and we created a CNMS reach ID field in our layer, which we call floodway reaches. And where we have connections between the two, or identical, not identical, but the same stream reach represented in the data set, we've copied that reach ID over. So you can see in the table, there's a lot of nulls in that format where we have line work that's not in studies line. But where we do, we've attributed that with the CNMS reach ID. And that allows us to do joins directly from our floodway reaches to the CNMS studies line table. And so we're able to bring that table in, use all the information that's inherent in that table about study updates and study validations and all that stuff, and able to tie it to our line. So we're utilizing the strengths of both data sets. So the line work and connectivity that we have in floodway reaches, we're keeping that. And we're able to use the high resolution line work so that we get better calculations of stream mileage for one. We see all of our study scope and study reaches in one data set rather than having to just see what's in CNMS and kind of guess what else may be out there that we want to study because it's a zone X and not out there. It also gives us our floodway reaches data set is what we use to track where we've studied. We have our old zone A's from our initial project, so we know where they are, and those are tagged in our floodway reaches, so that we know what we have to leverage, what we have to create, and what we have to study in any project we're looking at. So, and then we, like you said, a complete set of streams for 1 square mile, and we plan for complete coverage so that we don't we can see right off the bat where we need to study and where we need to focus our efforts. So with that, what we'll do is do a demo of the cost estimator tool that we've created. One of the issues that we've kind of run into as a CTP is that our region has, over the last couple of years, come to us very late in the planning process for a fiscal year, and have come to us and said, hey, you know, we've got a few more dollars left over from this, that, and the other thing, and hey, we know you have some of this information already ready to go. Can you come up with a project? And so, you know, we were able to do that, but there was a lot of time pressure and stress along with that, and you know, we could come up with a decent project, but you know, due to time constraints, we really felt like we weren't getting a full picture of everything that we needed to do. So, so in this last round of funding, we put a little money in to develop this cost estimator tool. It's just an ArcGIS online application that we use to use that CNMS and the floodway reaches line work to estimate costs for a region, whether that's a county, whether that's a HUC 10, a HUC 8, or combinations thereof. So here's just a little concept of what we've got. So we've got the floodway reaches data set inherent in this. You can see the best available floodplain layers below that in this screenshot. But we also have this information that's tied directly into CNMS, so that when we look at a stream we can tell both if it's been studied from our standpoint, whether we have a zone A or an updated zone AE that we want to publish, and we can also see whether it is a valid or not valid stream within CNMS. And therefore we can get that data together, tie it in, and then make decisions based on that. So with that, we're going to do a demonstration here. Okay, so this is the IDNR FEMA stream study and cost estimator tool. It is an ArcGIS online application, and we are hosting it here at DNR. We really only have connections to it from for us and for FEMA at this point. If there are others that would like to see this and like to play around with it a little bit, just get in touch with me. My email will be at the end of the presentation. We can add you to the AGOL list for a while and let you see it, but we aren't going to make this generally available to everyone. So what you see here now is the map of the state of Indiana and the HUC-8s for each watershed in Indiana. If we zoom in, we can see some of the information we have in the map, which is the best available flood layer, the stream reaches, and the panels and some other things with that. But the real power of this tool is to zoom back out and run the tool. So we're going to focus on this. The way we run it is we just have a little tool that is to select HUC-10s and counties. So we go down, select HUC-10, and then use this tool to actually select the HUC-10s we'll do. So we want to do these 3. And then we will also add a county in there. So we'll get everything from these 3 HUC-10s and the entire this entire county. What to do from there is just to run. Okay, so now we have output from the tool. We have an output file and an output geodatabase. We'll take a look at the output file first. And this is just a flat ASCII file with some information from the run. So we do have the summary of the county, Clinton County, and 3 HUC-10 basins that incorporates 5 different counties and 16 different communities. And is covered in 85 existing panels. Those are flood insurance rate map panels, of course. So here details, we have a summary of detailed study miles that we're looking for that are not NView compliant, study miles that are NView compliant, study miles that we have leverage studies on. So these are DNR studies that are detailed studies, and then a total list of detailed studies in the watershed and county area. The number of bridges to be surveyed, both field, which are ones that we do not have plans for, and surveyed in the office, which are ones we do have plans for, which would be interstates and state highways that our DOT has information on. So we can estimate how much field work we need to do for survey and how much office work. Then we have a summary of Zone A miles, both ones that we've studied in our Zone A project, ones that are Zone X, when there's Zone A that aren't NView compliant, and a set that are Zone A's but NView compliant. Then a total number of DNR study miles. So we'll be contributing 418 miles of stream to this project. And then there's miles of non-model backed zones to be studied. So to pick up absolutely everything in this watershed, we'd have to study an additional 131 miles of stream. So here we have a summary of CNMS. We have 54 compliant miles, 298 to be studied miles, and 247 miles that have not been identified in CNMS at all. So if we were to study this area, it would get us 546 miles of new NView and 600 total miles of NView. We also summarize population, land classifications. This is mostly an agricultural area. Number of dams in the area, number of levee structures, number of total structures in the special flood hazard area. We use the Bing footprints to estimate number of structures. And then do we have highly mobile streams in that's true in this case. So we have fluvial erosion hazards to think about here also. Then we're using standard FEMA costs out of the latest Blue Book to determine the cost for this study. So that's broken down by initial community outreach field survey, hydrology, hydraulics, floodplain mapping, preliminary processing, flood risk products, and flood risk review meetings and CCO meetings. We do not do or cost out anything post-preliminary other than the CCO meeting, because as our CTP does not do post-preliminary work. And we do not incorporate absolutely every little piece that would be in a mapping activity statement in this cost summary. But we get the main piece of it, and we're at least 95, probably 98% of the cost is all in here. So we present total cost and cost per NV mile and cost per floodplain structure, just so we can do comparisons to other watersheds and other areas we're contemplating studying. Then we also list out each of the studies directly, which ones are NView compliant to be studied, detailed leverage studies, streams studied by IDNR. So there's a long list of those, and then there's another long list of to be studied. And most of these you can see are pretty short reaches that we didn't bother to cover in our previous study. So we focused that on stream reaches that were over a mile and a half. So that's usually what we see there. Then from the tool, we also see that we get an output geodatabase. I've downloaded that and pulled that into ArcView. And so we can see the information that comes out of there are extract of all the counties and all the HUC-10s. So the county we chose, Clinton County, and the 3 HUC-10s we chose are all extracted. We have extract of panels. So we have each panel that's being impacted by this particular study area, each community. We've exported the community boundaries out. And we export out the floodway reaches from our layer, and then the CNMS from the latest CNMS runs that FEMA has. So therefore we can, what I've done here is linked these two, did a join between floodway reaches and CNMS extract, and attributed the floodway reaches by validation status. So we have a bunch that are all other values, which means they're not in CNMS, but we have others that are assessed and valid and unknown and unverified. So all that information can be used to further refine the cost estimate. We expect and anticipate that once we run this tool that we'll be going in and refining our numbers somewhat based on local knowledge and other information that we may have that is not in the tool or not in the data set that we have. So that does it for the presentation. Let me put this slide up. So this has my email address if you want to get a hold of me with any questions, or if you do want to see the tool and you're on ArcGIS Online, we can add you and give you some access to it if you want to try it out and just see how it looks. I know a number of states have approached me for wanting to see access to try to develop something similar in their states. So thank you very much.
Hello guys, we are back again. There are 3 good questions for Dave. I'll start with the question from Libran Chow. He says, that's a great synopsis report for analyzing a watershed model validity. And he asks, how often, Dave, you sync Region 5 CNMS database? Is it quarterly or real time?
We get data from the RSC, the Regional Center, Service Center, quarterly. So when FEMA's their information quarterly, we get that. We make the links between our database and that database. Typically, it's only a few at a time, so it's not that large of an effort to sync them back up. But quarterly, yes.
An anonymous question it says, how do you ensure the accuracy of the data in CNMS?
Well, we go through and when we find issues with CNMS, we of course are well tied into the folks who are working on it at the RSC, and we've done a lot of work with them to try to correct issues where we find them, where they come up. So we're working constantly with them to update and correct issues that we see. And sometimes it's just things that we need to get fixed to make the database work on our end, and they've been happy to do that.
Gina Tan asks, are you using these cost estimates to prioritize which projects to pursue? Or do you focus on other criteria for prioritization?
Well, it's part of it. Certainly, given the budget that FEMA presents to us, we need to be within that budget. So it kind of forces our hand in some cases that we need to do some cost estimating to say, okay, we want to work in this area because we can get it in budget, and these other areas we would be over budget. So that does influence it. Yeah, it's not completely based on that. I mean, we have our prioritization from this our business plans and everything. So.
Understood. Our final question, have you considered using catastrophe models by the insurance industry to understand flood risk compared to replacement costs?
Not so much, especially with this effort. We've looked at a number of other initiatives, especially structural based floodplain analysis for some areas. And we haven't done a whole lot with that in terms of looking at any industry or insurance industry data. Honestly, that's hard to get to in any meaningful way for us at the state. So we kind of focus on the data that we have in front of us. We've got enough data to play with. So we pretty much focus on that. And someday we want to get into looking at some other wider ranging models and data that's out there. But right now we're pretty much focused on getting the floodplain maps that we have updated into FEMA's program.
Thank you, Dave. Let's squeeze in one final question, and then for the sake of time, we'll need to go to our second presentation. How can the tool be accessed?
As I said in the presentation, it's a ArcGIS Online application, and right now it is not public. However, if you'd want to see it, I'd be happy to. If you have an AGOL account, you can send me an email, and I can put you on to. I can link you into that group that has access to it, and you can see it from there. It's pretty specific in terms of its focus. So we didn't see a whole lot of value of trying to put it out as a public facing thing and advertising it, and so we didn't think we'd get a whole lot of interest in it. It's pretty specifically narrowed to a CDP in Indiana who's looking to do cost estimating for various watersheds. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave. For the sake of time, we are going to our second presenter, and our second presenter is Stephen No. Stephen is the project manager, the program manager for FEMA-related services at Wood. He's going to discuss why every state needs a flood risk data business plan.
All righty, I think we're ready to get going. I think everybody can see the screen, and we should be good to go live here. Thank y'all for coming to this presentation. Every state and territory should have a Flood Risk Business Plan. I'm Steve Noe with Wood Environment and Infrastructure, co-presenter that I had to help put this presentation together that's not presenting, but help put it together is Dale Rockfield. He's the CTP project manager for the state of Missouri. One of the things that goes into putting a good business plan together is, as you've been involved in the risk map process and the map modernization process, you got discovery, you got data development, you're creating firms, you do the risk map products and the flood risk products, and hopefully that pathway of the whole line gets you to mitigation projects, whether they're dirt moving mitigation projects or if they're just pencil moving higher regulation mitigation projects. You can do a business plan layout and a roadmap, either paper or digital. As I like to say, those old timers kind of like paper, and we can read map. Millennials can't read a map. It's got to be digital. But so either one works. But the main thing is to get one. Every territory or state really needs a roadmap for flood risk. And that flood risk should be driven by the subject matter experts that understand the flood risk for the given territory. Oftentimes, we consultants, engineers, scientists, agency subject matter experts, and anybody else associated with hydrology and hydraulics and risk development, sometimes we try to make things too complicated. And parts of it are complicated, but developing a plan and a method and understanding the need for updated risk and how those updated risks can add value to you helping make your community safer and reduction in local damage and cost, that shouldn't be that complicated. And we as professionals need to be challenged to try to create and present this information through a business plan, like a front porch conversation. Typically, the process when you go through and creating a project like this, sometimes it falls into an endless loop because we try to make things perfect. Everybody wants to make it perfect. Well, if you wait until you've got the perfect business plan in order to roll it out, you'll never get there. So the main thing is to lay a good foundation, get things developed in a database such that as things change, you can change things in the database, update things, and then move forward with your business plan. All the basics starts with a good foundation. Your house, a car starts with a good solid chassis. Well, topography is definitely that foundation that flood risk data is built upon. And fortunately, across the U.S. and for most states and territories, large portions of the states and territories have good topography. Aerials. We're very fortunate in this country to have aerials, and we have access now like we've never had before to historic aerials and older aerials. You can actually go back and look at, well, how things have changed in this watershed since the 1975 maps were created or the 1980 maps have created. Where has the growth gone? And all of those kind of things become very valuable in laying out that flood risk business plan and where you need to go in terms of producing updated flood risk. And remember, your business plan should be created such that you're creating a path to not only protect and give the people that are already near the flood risk good things to manage by and to understand what their true risks are, but it also should be for those that are going to be building and developing in those areas that aren't developed yet. So I'm very sensitive to that, in particular in the rural America in the Midwest, such that we put things on the map so that in the future, we're not creating additional risk or undue risk. We're doing our best job possible to keep those risks away from our structures and off of our roads and other things such that we can reduce the loss of life. But one of the key things here in the development of the plan in order to moving forward is having a good updated political boundary, as well as taking even your old paper maps and georectifying them and cropping off the collars so that it is a puzzle piece mixture of the existing floodplain. So you can kind of see what level of floodplain and flood risk data the locals have had in order to manage their flood risk in the past. And then also disaster declarations. What areas have seen floods of record since their last flood risk data sets were created? Well, the first thing to do that I believe in developing a good flood risk business plan is figuring out what your buckets are. I'm a buckets person. I grew up on a farm packing buckets. Everywhere you went, you packed buckets with something in it, feed, vegetables, whatever. It's kind of the same thing for your business plan. What are your buckets? What are your priority buckets? What is each of the things going into each of the areas? For Missouri, we came up with 4 basic buckets. We had the paper only maps, in other words, where you only had paper, certain areas that were never mapped. We had the map modernization maps that were created on the 10-meter DIMS. And then we had the DFIRM on LIDAR DIMS, as well as the modernized risk map areas that were developed during risk map on LIDAR. So those were kind of our 4 buckets. And actually, those are kind of our order of priorities for studies that's in the current business plan. One of the things that's important was, maybe you had a map modernization project that was updated in 2010 or 2011 when effective. But when you go back and look at it, it was a 1980s study that was redelineated. So the hydrology and hydraulics was never updated. And lo and behold, there was a lot of development, and there's 5 new bridges, and there's all these other things associated with that flood risk area. There's a lot of areas that are A zones that need to be AEs, that people are dying for getting new BFEs so that they know what to build to. There's lots of other things that you can use to create where you need to do detailed studies versus approximate studies, specifically proximity of structures. There's structure databases and footprints out there that you can use to quantify that. And one of the things we try to do is we try to identify any lakes that have multiple property owners around them, because putting a base flood elevation on those lakes really helps in future land transactions. And it's just an added value. Complexities, you out there that are listening that have been involved in the program for a long time, you understand this, in that sometimes watershed studies and community-based projects conflict with each other. When we went from map mod to risk map, we solved one problem because we started looking at things on a watershed basis, but we also started looking at things within a area where we might be going to a community or a county 3 different times in order to get that county covered. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had a county commissioner tell me, look, if you can't study my whole county, then don't study any of it, because I'm not going to have that conversation with my constituents why part of you are getting updated flood risk and the others aren't. So we worked hard to come up with a solution to go through that. FEMA is flexible on that. You don't have to stay with a HUC 8. You can go down to a HUC 12, or you can go up. As long as they're not too big. They'd probably get upset if we picked the Missouri or the lower Mississippi or Arkansas white red there and tried to do that as one big basin in the MIP. They'd also get upset if we went too small, where our watershed size was just the local McDonald's site. So you try to reach that happy medium. Well, we worked with a guy at Region 7 by the name of Bob Franke to come up with this. And what we developed was the Missouri hydrologic unit codes, or the MUC codes. Bob retired about the same time we did this. We gave serious consideration to naming it as the Franke unit codes, but we that work in acronyms, we decided that we better stick with the Missouri unit codes for this. But as you can see, we named them to match. Like, we had 3 counties down here that were paper that needed to be updated. So we developed a watershed in the southern part here and named it Missouri South Central to Arkansas. So you don't have to come up with some fancy combined watershed name that has all of the streams. Name these new hydrologic unit codes for your business plan to where they have a geography tied to them. Make it easy for you to communicate to your stakeholders. It's always important in your business plan to keep up with your status on your special flood hazard areas as you walk through the state, so that the stakeholders can see progress as you're walking through with the updated special flood hazard areas. Topography is the benchmark, and as I've said, we've been very fortunate in the state of Missouri, as well as I know in several other states, to have partners like NRCS and the USGS and the Corps of Engineers and others that have similar projects in similar areas that partner with FEMA to combine their resources so that they can get total areas covered instead of just smaller areas for topography. The CNMS database, it's kind of the driver on needs and updates, and our goal here is to have 90% compliance by the end of 2023. Good imagery is always important. As you take a small community like this, they may have had nothing but approximate studies. They had detailed studies and a few approximates, but as you will do a virtual walk and look around, you start to see these other streams that have a lot of areas, and maybe you do a quick Google search and you find out that here in Clinton, in a downpour in last July, they had flooding in downtown here. So having good detailed studies along this stream would be important to them as they move forward with flood risk management, and that's part of the things you need to consider. Differentials, taking differential topography and looking at different things and how it compares on the raster data is also important if you've got a good GIS specialist that can provide you that data. A good business plan also takes the goals of your local, state agencies and state CTP and meshes those with FEMA's headquarters and regional goals. Here we had basically 6 major goals that came together, and basically to have special flood hazard areas on USGS 3 Dept compliant LIDAR, to eliminate the mapping, paper mapping, reach and maintain at least a 90% in-view compliance, have flood risk products statewide, have it dialed down to structure-specific flood risk, and take the flood risk products and roll those into disaster recovery for improved resilience. In goal 1 for in-view compliance, we're getting there, and we're developing these special flood hazard areas, walking across the state, modeling, doing 2D modeling with excess rain on grid on hydrology, using HECRAS, hopefully soon to be 5.1 hydraulics. We've done a lot of coordination with our neighbors, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Arkansas, and even Illinois to some extent along the Mississippi River on updates along there, to make sure that our modeling and our takes into account any modeling that has been done from those states that contribute to Missouri, as well as modeling in the state of Missouri that would contribute to them. And we are walking through the state, and we are probably right at about 50% of the state now is modeled using 2D excess rain on grid and 2D modeling. Number 2, eliminate the 33 counties that were paper maps that were never defirmed in the beginning. I can tell you now that these have all been successfully funded and working from cradle to grave. There are 11 counties that are rolling out a flood study and floodplain mapping right now, and we'll be rolling into panel production within the next 6 weeks. And those are the last 11 counties in the state to roll through the regulatory process. Our business plan has these maps and it's linked to a database that kind of rolls through for in-view compliance. And this will be our goals for 2020, 2021, 22, 23, and 24. And this is just an incremental map that helps anybody that has access to the business plan to get to it and be able to see that in-view compliance. Same thing for flood risk products. Our goal is to have those flood risk products statewide and have those flood risk products not only available, but teach the people how to fish using them. Teach them how to use them in order to create mitigation strategies within their communities. Structure specific, we've done some bare bones on this to where we show proximity of structures to Zone A floodplains, which are the green, AEs are the red, and the 500-year or the 0.2% being the diamonds. And this is just something we put on our outreach site, kind of gives people an idea of where are the clusters of structures along streams that they need to pay more attention to and more review, because, you know, down here where this cluster is down here in the lower end is probably where they're going to get the phone calls when the maps go out. We've got footprints created not only from the new LAS LiDAR, but also the Microsoft footprints. And we've went and combined those two data sets to merge to make a complete data set. Goal 6, we've taken all of the flood risk products and rolled it into the Missouri's enhanced hazard mitigation plan, as well as we're continuing to communicate through floodplain news and floodplain newsletters. Last but not least, for sure, is a funding plan. We fund these. We do funding requests, basically discovery, data development, and post prelim, as well as some technical projects as we go along. And this is basically just a walkthrough of the funding plans for the next 5 years. Metrics change. The only thing true in FEMA's world has changed. The way we do things today is not the way we're going to be doing things tomorrow. The way they do rates is not the way they're going to be done tomorrow or the way they're done today. So, but if you build your business plan smart and have it database driven and use the science and the parameters of the data to build your direction and your roadmap, then a metric change does not rock your world too much. You can make those changes and build that in and make your and be flexible such that you can quickly provide a report out to the region and the headquarters as to, okay, if you're going to change this metrics from A to B, then this is our new path, and this is how we'll get there, and this is how long it'll take us to get there. You may be sitting there saying, well, golly, you know, it's easy for you to say that, but man, that's a lot of work. It's not that complicated. If you've got a good GIS specialist and you can consolidate all of the data into a common place, and you've got a good GIS specialist analyst that can drive the ship while you have a meeting, and if you can get the right 4 to 6 people in a room and get a commitment focus from them for 3 to 4 days of focus, you can basically do a virtual walk of every stream in a state and a territory and come up with a plan of where you need to be and where you need to study and what level of studies you need to be done. And then you apply your costing model to that. And if you don't have one, creating that can take you a little bit of time, but it's not that difficult if you do it from a database driven, because if you decide to change the cost on a particular commodity, then you just change it, roll it, update it, and you have updated costs. So the goal here is to share with y'all what I believe is something that's needed for every state and territory. CTPs are required to create a business plan as part of being a CTP in the CTP program. Those states that are not CTPs or not active CTPs, I truly believe that FEMA would be wise to invest in the development of a business plan, a flood risk data business plan for those states and entities. And I think that would help them serve their constituents, prioritize their projects, and have a better focus on where they're going and how they're going to get there. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
All right, we're back for questions. Before we go there, though, very quickly, Steve, I think we have lost the broadcast for a few minutes when you were discussing the goals. So I will ask you to very quickly go over the goals, hopefully within less than a minute. Can you do that for us?
There was somebody walking over. All righty. Okay. Hey, Selick, what was your question?
So the broadcast froze when you were talking about your goals. Could you please summarize the goals for our audience one more time without taking too much time, please?
Basically, the goals were to come up with FEMA compliant special flood hazard areas on 3 Dept LiDAR. It was to come up with in-view compliance and be able to maintain it at a 90% level across the state or the territory. And then it was to provide flood risk products statewide, as well as provide flood risk assessments on a community down to a structures level for each community. And then last but not least, roll your flood risk products into the disaster recovery mode, such that if you have a structure that washes out and you need to put 2 48s back instead of a 48, use your flood risk data to help justify that during the rebuild after the disaster. And that was pretty much the 6 goals.
Thank you very much. And we apologize for that interruption, guys. We received also some comments. A borderland millennial suggests that some millennials can actually read maps. FYI, Steve. Another comment is about the developed lakes. I think it says so many of them are Zone A, and they would benefit from having BFEs. Let me see if there are any other questions. I'll give 30 seconds for additional questions if there are any. If not, we're going to go to our third session. Well, thank you very much, guys. Steve, I think you are off the hook.
All righty. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our last presenters in the session are Stephen Bourne and Joshua Murphy. Stephen is the project director for Atkins. He has experience in engineering and software development. Joshua is a senior geographer at NOAA with almost 20 years of data and tool development. Go ahead, guys.
Okay, thank you. All right, everyone, welcome to this session on a new product that we have been developing with the Office for Coastal Management. We call it Adapting Stormwater Management for Coastal Floods. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys today. The Association of State Floodplain Managers is one of our Keystone Digital Coast partners, and we certainly enjoy working with both the ASFPM national audience and through the members as well. So my name is Josh Murphy. I'm with the Office for Coastal Management, part of NOAA and the National Ocean Service. And joining me today for this presentation will be Steve Bourne with Atkins Global. We partnered with Atkins Global to develop a good portion of the content for the product that you're going to see today. So I'll go through a little bit of the product itself, some of the background that I think is important for folks to know about how and why we developed the product that we did and how it turned out. And then I'll turn things over to Steve for a little bit to talk about some of the technical details of some of the methodologies that Atkins, again, helped us develop as a part of this product. And then I'll wrap things up by talking about some next steps for where we see the next kind of phase of development for this product. And it's important to note that our office, through the auspices of the Digital Coast platform, and also just baked into everything that we do, really looks to the folks that we serve, the end users in the coastal resource management community to help drive what we do. And again, for us coming from the office. First and foremost, we saw this as an opportunity to address a potential issue that had an information gap that was not being addressed through other different products and services. So we looked through our partners in the Digital Coast, the American Planning Association, to lead a needs assessment to look at where those issue gaps may be. And one issue that came up along the coast was this notion of coastal communities were starting to see this notion of really, to put it for lack of a better term, combined coastal flooding. What happens when you have a significant precipitation event coincident with an extreme water level event on the coastal side of things? As water levels are increasing, and we expect them to continue to increase in many areas, we expect that we will see these kind of combined flooding events occur more frequently. So how can we help communities better understand, when and where they may potentially be impacted from such a kind of coincident precipitation and coastal flooding event. We also recognize that a lot of the communities that we serve are kind of, they can be broken up into a bit of a dichotomy. There are the communities that are the larger communities that have access to a variety of technical and fiscal resources. These are the communities that have the resources to effectively model their stormwater systems, to work with a lot of technical data and information in-house, or to work with an external partner to be able to do that. For every one of those communities, there are a many number of smaller communities along the coast that don't have access to those resources. So we wanted to make this product be something that could be relevant to multiple audiences that have different levels of technical information. Something we hear time and time again from the folks that we serve is that there's a plethora of tools that are out there, really a wide variety of tools and products and services. Folks almost feel inundated, no pun intended, with regard to tools. And so we really wanted to make this not just another tool that was out there, but really to figure out how we could use this as a product that kind of knits together, educates, and informs on what are the various tools and methods that are out there that can be leveraged to address this combined coastal flooding issue. We also wanted to make this a comprehensive product that didn't just provide tools and methods to help a community understand the issue, but also understand the steps that they could take to address the issue once they understand a little bit more about the scope and the scale of the issue at hand. So we actually integrated that into the product design. And then finally, this is an area that is, there's a lot of interest in, a lot of research going on now, this notion of kind of looking at this combined coastal and precip-based flooding, and certainly as it relates to urban environments, there's a lot of interest in this notion of urban stormwater management and implications there. So we wanted to make this something that could be constantly evolving to take advantage of new products, services, perspectives, and tools. Bringing all that together, we designed the Adapting Stormwater Management for Coastal Floods product to really be this comprehensive kind of information repository. I think that the term tool is a bit ambiguous these days. One person's tool is another person's kind of dynamic website. So we actually we designed this to really be what we think of as like a learning product. And so if you actually look for this on our Digital Coast platform, you'll see that it's actually in the Digital Coast Academy. It's a self-guided learning resource, but we really intend it to be kind of this comprehensive look at information resources that help someone understand the different types of coastal flooding. Right, there's various different components that need to be examined to look at to potentially look at scenarios for looking at future water levels. So helping someone understand a little bit more about what those different components are, help them understand how they can look at when and where they can see impacts potentially as it relates to their stormwater system once they've actually potentially identified or derived this kind of future coastal total water level. And again, we wanted to buttress this product with information on what communities could do to effectively address the issue in their area. Right, so I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes to kind of walking you through what you can find in the product in itself, the different sections that we have. And again, in just a couple minutes, I'll pass things off to my colleague Steve Bourne at Atkins, who will go through the third section of the product. But before we get there, I want to talk about the first section, which is what we call Understand. And basically, it's meant to be a way for folks who may not be aware of the issue, at hand, this notion of the combined kind of flooding issue, and this notion of kind of thinking about, water level, coastal water levels as kind of a series of kind of additive components, and really start to think about that it's a lot of times what happens here is that water levels are the result of, especially extreme water levels are the result of several different things at play. And so we actually incorporated this graphic you see here that is dynamic and can be driven by the user on the website to help them kind of understand, well, what happens when you have, say, regional oceanographic forces that are going to vary, again, depending on where you are along the coast at the same time that you have, say, the highest astronomical tide. And then what happens when you have that all occurring at the same time as you have some sort of a storm event that brings surge and wind and waves, and what happens then when you've got a coincident rainfall event. So not meant to be anything more than just kind of symbolic to help folks kind of understand kind of this notion of when you look at this kind of coastal water levels, that there's various different components, things that can contribute to this actual notion of a coastal total water level. And then we also, again, kind of talk about the potential impacts of that on the ability of a community along the coast to be able to effectively manage stormwater. That's meant to, again, kind of make sure that everyone's on the same page, kind of leveling the playing field, if you will, so that everyone has that kind of same base level of information on the issue at hand. The second part of the product is what we call the assess portion. It includes a sub-product called the Quick Flood Assessment Tool. Basically, what this is it's a product that it allows the user to first identify a tide gauge location. Basically, what this is doing is it's pulling from a database that's developed by our colleagues at the Center for Operational Oceanographic Products and Services, the folks who do tides and currents within NOAA. They've done several reports over the last couple of years looking at regional and local sea level rise scenarios, as well as extreme water level events that are kind of tied to that. So the first thing that the user does when they come to this section of the product is to select a tide gauge location that's kind of closest to their community. Perhaps there's one in their community, perhaps there's one fairly close by. But once they do that, sets that kind of location, the boundary for this quick analysis, the next thing that we ask them to do is to input a flood elevation threshold. So this could be basically any water level elevation. In this case, it's tied to the mean high water tidal datum. But basically, it's kind of that, it's a subjective input that someone can come in here and really kind of use to kind of say, hey, this is a water level that when this water level is exceeded, you know, we start to experience issues in our community. You know, there's a number of different thresholds. Looking at extreme water levels coming from NOAA, from the National Weather Service, from the Center for Operational Oceanographic Products and Services. The user can input those water levels into here, or they can use the map-based information that comes from our sea level rise viewer you see here. So you can basically use that same slider bar to raise and lower the water level to, again, kind of account for that specific threshold elevation. And then the last thing that we do is kind of separate from the flood elevations. We ask folks to enter in a duration, a number of days in which, you know, if the number of days in which high tide flooding occurs in the community, if you can put a threshold on that in terms of duration. If that duration is exceeded, that's basically a subjective kind of a threshold, time-bound threshold that essentially communities, someone can say, hey, this is where, again, you know, high tide flooding goes from being kind of maybe more of a nuisance to being more of a larger issue within the community itself. So very simple inputs that the user brings into this, and then what they get is kind of like a bit of a short, concise report that basically, you know, is the outcome and the outputs of our query and some methods that we do in the background. To really start to kind of put this into a bit of a context, kind of a temporal context, really start to kind of use both that kind of flood elevation threshold and that flood duration threshold, and start to answer some questions. You see here some of the information we provide is, you know, how much sea level rise would it take to change that current return period for that kind of identified or user identified elevation threshold to where it is currently to a 2-year return period or 50% likelihood. Start to think about, again, and certainly be scenario dependent based on the sea level rise scenario, but when we would expect that user identified threshold elevation to be the future mean high water kind of elevation, and when we'd expect the flooding events to exceed that threshold that the user put in here. So a lot of this is really meant to kind of provide this kind of quick kind of temporal context so that folks can start to know a little bit more about, you know, planning horizons, maybe when they should start thinking about, you know, depending again on the elevation and the duration that they put in there, you know, when they could start to expect to see issues from that, when that starts to go from being something that may be anomalous to something that would be a little bit more likely. All this is something that can be printed out as a part of the product. We also provide the methods, a detailed methods document for how we actually pull this information together as a part of this quick flood assessment tool report. So these are the first two sections that we have as a part of this product. The third section goes into a lot more depth of detail to help users better understand the impacts of a potential coastal high water event on their stormwater system. So I'm going to hand things over to my colleague Steve Bourne with Atkins Global, who's going to walk you through the methodology that they developed for this analyze section of the product. So Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. This is Steve Bourne from Atkins. As Josh mentioned, we worked primarily on this analyze section of the tool. We've done is understand, assess, analyze, and then the fourth one is take action. So we're talking analyze now, and this is where we go into a bit more detail on the response of your system, the ability of your stormwater system to handle these scenarios that are coming. We defined a very simple sort of 5-step process. The first step is to calculate that total water level, multiple events occurring at the same time. What coastal water level is your community going to be facing as a result of that? Second step is to understand overtopping flow rate. If that wall of water ends up overtopping in your community, what kind of damage is it going to do? What kind of flow rates can you expect? Step 3 is precipitation runoff. If you're going to include in your scenario a precipitation event at the same time that the coastal flooding is occurring, what impact will that have? And then step 4, discharges from other sources. And this can be levees, and other sort of stormwater control features that you may have in your community. Step 5, compare flows to capacity. So in other words, you're trying to understand, can your system handle the projected flows that will occur? Josh has brought in scenario 1 here. We have a couple of scenarios to sort of illustrate this point. In scenario 1, we're saying here, okay, future seas, which means sea level rise, will be included, and also king tide will be included in the coastal water level. And you can see on the diagram the different components that go into making up that total water level that you can expect during this scenario. There's a sea level rise portion, seasonal tidal portion, king tidal portion, and then any wave action involved. The methodology we have goes through how to actually estimate each of these things. And you can see based on the diagram that when you get to that total water level, it will exceed the outfall elevation of your stormwater system. But luckily within this system, there's a tidal flap valve, which will prevent that flooding from entering the city, at least during the time that the tide's that high. Also, you see that this community has a very large wall or berm that would stop any further flooding unless the tide gets really high. So in this scenario, you can see that while the stormwater system might not operate, the water, the tidal level is too high to allow it to let stormwater pass through, it is not going to get inundated because of an adaptation measure like a tidal flap valve. If we go to the next scenario, however, what you can see is that, if more things happen during the scenario, like a storm occurs and that storm creates a surge, you might get overtopping and you might get flow into the community, flow which would, even though you have a tidal flap valve, may not actually help. There might also be a rain event. The methodologies we've defined sort of show you how to calculate the different flow rates and different water levels that will occur in your community. Interestingly, we have this sort of scenario framework set up where you apply the same 5 steps to any scenario you come up with. And in many instances, you can do these calculations fairly simply. But we also go through in the methodology how to use modeling approaches, which will give you much more rich answers when you do your analysis. Next slide. An example is the Charleston study we did. If you go to the tool and go to the Analyze section, there's actually a fully downloadable PDF. I think it's about 120 pages. And it goes through a complete analysis of Charleston, a portion of Charleston anyway, and looks at lots of different scenarios, like the current condition plus king tide flooding, 25 years in the future, with sunny day flooding, how bad is that going to be, 25 years in the future with a large storm, and so on. Lots of different scenarios, just to illustrate, how the method is used and what kind of answers it can provide. And back to Josh.
Excellent, Steve. Thanks. Yeah, this was certainly a very fruitful partnership for us to have with regard to this product. We've got a lot of great folks on staff supporting this effort from within NOAA that certainly are experts in coastal inundation and mapping coastal inundation, but certainly having our colleagues and friends at Atkins help us out on the stormwater side was extremely beneficial for helping us really understand the impacts and develop something that again we really we feel can be something that can be brought to our users to help them better understand the issue potentially in their communities. All right. So that was the third section. The fourth section is that section that I spoke about before, where we didn't just want to provide information for folks to better understand the scope and scale of the issue, but to potentially what they can do to take action. And certainly something here that that kind of permeates this section is this notion that depending again on the scale of this, of the issue in your community, it's going to take more than just the stormwater manager, the stormwater engineer to be able to effectively address it into the future. And so what we've done is we've provided we've organized this information in different action areas that we feel really provide linkages to kind of taking a whole of community approach to addressing this issue. So we start with action area 1, planning. Certainly, and provide information on those kind of plans, hazard mitigation plans, and the like. And you see here what's shown here is the CRS guidance from 2006, which has since been updated. But certainly, it illustrates the fact that there are lots of plans and things that already communities are kind of implementing. So how can they leverage them to be able to address this issue? We continue on with things like regulation, standards, and guidance. So thinking about it not just from the planning side, but from the floodplain management side, certainly as well. And then getting into the more of the traditional on-the-ground measures, BMPs and the like that stormwater managers are going to be more familiar with. And certainly for our standpoint in our office, green infrastructure, natural nature-based techniques is something that is of huge interest to coastal communities. So we try to provide linkages to some of the resources we have in-house, as well as some coming from our colleagues at EPA and other different organizations. Speaking of EPA, the last action area we have is funding, providing information on where communities might be able to leverage existing funding streams, like what the EPA provides for water finance and the like. So again, really meant to kind of provide that here are some next steps that you can take to address the issue from a community standpoint. Finally, certainly something we've heard over the years is that communities like to learn what others are doing from the communities themselves. And so we wanted to make sure that we bring about case studies into this so that you can see what, say, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is doing and how they've brought this into their coastal zone management plan, and especially as it relates to sea level rise and the impact on coastal stormwater management, or what the city of Wilmington, North Carolina is doing, or what the city of Olympia, Washington is doing here. So again, trying to kind of hit this issue home and really provide information on what other communities and states are doing to address the issue. All right, so one of the things that has made this product a little bit different than what we've done in other parts of our office is that we have we're phasing the development of this in, and so it's important to kind of lay out what we're working on right now and what you'll see in the next version of this. We're calling it kind of version or phase 2.0, right? So one of the things that we did after we released this in 2018 was we wanted to continue down the path of getting feedback from our users, and this again is where we brought in Atkins Global to really to help us be able to try to bring these to bring us to the communities and really start to look at how this methodology that they've helped us develop really can be used. And so we worked with the communities of Olympia, Washington, as an example of a community that has a little bit more resources, the modeling capabilities to model their stormwater system, and then a smaller community like Hallandale Beach in Florida that really doesn't, is endemic of a smaller, indicative, of a smaller community that may not have those same resources. And so here you see some of the things that we learned, which was extremely helpful for us. Our goal is to make this not just an information repository, but to make it useful and really applicable. And so you see some of the things that we learned here, that we learned through these workshops, the fact that this is it's not a trivial, simple calculation or derivation. It's challenging to work through, and that, there needs to be a solution to help folks better manage the information. So we certainly saw that loud and clear. And then we saw the opportunity to be able to, really start to pull out this notion of doing a coastal total water level derivation, that it's the same whether you're a small community or a large city. So figure out how we can kind of bring that out of the framework that was already part of the analyze section. And then basically, start to figure out how we can really just simplify and really streamline everything. So what's that resulted in is some changes that we're working on right now. You see a couple things on here. We're going to be enhancing the output from the assess section, the quick flood assessment tool I talked about, augmenting the information there with more visualizations, data visualizations, charts, graphs, and the like. Really being able to strengthen the linkages between that section and the analyze section Steve talked about before. Kind of reorganizing that analyze workflow to pull out better that coastal total water level computation or derivation. You see that is kind of, we've got the new diagram for the flow of the section down here at the bottom, also simplifying things a little bit more than what we have on the current site. And again, trying to really work to provide inputs, make things a little bit more interactive for the user to be able to help them better manage information from when they're actually working through the derivations within that analyze section. And then finally, you're really working to augment the amount of information material we have as it relates to case studies and what communities are doing to effectively addressing this issue. So that's all we have today. Again, I want to thank Steve Bourne from Atkins for co-presenting today. This is the link to the site. I certainly invite everyone to take a look at it. We are very interested in getting your feedback as we are making these changes, and we certainly look forward to coming back and sharing what we'll have to offer as a part of the version 2 or phase 2 product, which will be out in the fall. You see my contact information there. So that's it for recorded Josh and recorded Steve, but I know we are also right now going to be on the live Q&A. So we look forward to getting your questions. And again, thank you very much for your time and attention today.
We are back again, and I have Stephen Bourne and Joshua Murphy for taking your questions. I do see a comment from Alan Johnson with FEMA Region 6. He suggests that many coastal communities flood higher than the adjacent BFEs from intense rainfall events. And he notes that all Harvey and 2016 Louisiana flooding in August was within 4 feet of best available flood elevations. So he notes that for you guys. I do not see any other questions, but let me ask this question to you. Is there anything else that you would like to further elaborate in your presentation for our audience?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question, and appreciate the opportunity to share what we've been working on with Steve and his group at Atkins over the last couple of years. I guess I'll just state that we're in the process right now of we're kind of doing a bit of a dynamic development, and so I welcome any and all comments and thoughts. Certainly not just on this Q&A session, but invite folks to take a look at what we have. We're kind of in the phase right now of continually kind of updating the product, such that your input certainly can play a big role in difference in helping us continue to modify the product. I mean, we want it to be as usable and applicable as it possibly can to our users, and ideally that includes a lot of the the floodplain management community that's here at the conference. So just maybe just a plug to certainly take a look at what we have to offer on the live site. You've got our contact information, and we hope to certainly hear from you in the near future.
Is the tool public?
It is, yeah. You can get to it through our Digital Coast site. You can just Google Digital Coast to find it. It's actually in the Digital Coast Academy section. It's a self-guided learning product that you can get to from there. You could also just easily Google the name of the product, Adapting Stormwater Management for Coastal Floods. So it is live, and what you see is kind of it's phase 1 or version 1 of what we've got. And again, we're in the process of making some updates to the version 2 product that'll be coming out in the fall.
Excellent, thank you. We still have a few minutes. I'll wait for another 30 seconds in case there is another question or a comment, and then we will conclude our session. Well, I don't see any further comments or questions. Thank you very much, guys, and thanks again to our other presenters. Thanks to our sponsor, Freeze Nichols, and thank you, our audience, for your time and questions. Enjoy the conference, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.